What's up, Dan? How you doing?
Eric, good morning. What a place to be on a rainy Saturday morning for again, huh? So
Yes.
anyway, this is take two, right? We thought we were
Yeah, yeah.
recording. It turned out that we had to buy a subscription, so I took care of that. I bought it. Now we're getting better as we go along. So anyway, we're gonna try to keep these to a half hour. Um, so we got some good stuff to talk about this morning. So I think we should just dive right into it, Eric. Last time we talked about coal was wealth, and the C is construction. There's five types of construction for anyone that didn't hear the last episode. And type ones are what according to Chief Dunn, fire resistant construction. And he in his book, The Collapse of Burning Buildings, which is like for me was like the Bible of construction, and Brannigan, he talked about the two aspects of each type of construction. And for type one, we're talking about what the hazards are, and it's the smoke spread, it's the HVACs.
Hmm.
And normally, it depending on the building, if they have central air or non-central air, that's the defining point. How is it up in Boston? I know in New York we have three types of high rises. We have the old type. I call them the Empire State Building, Chrysler Building type. Then you have the mid range. They go from like let's say they go up to like 1968. That's when we had a new building code. So maybe 38 to 68, and that's like a
Yeah.
hybrid where they have a little of both, and then you have the type like the World Trade Center, which is the modern skyscrapers. How is it looking up there in Boston with you guys?
It's pretty similar. In fact, they just had a fire the other day on the roof of the old style. I want to say it's 12 stories, maybe more. I'm not sure. Uh I forget a lot of the buildings down there now, but they had like uh the city and the infinite wisdom is letting people build all kind of wooden decks on the roof. So it looks
Oh,
like the whole roof was going, and it looks like it had some type of wood flooring above the roof, but it was in an old style high rise. Uh,
mm,
you know, very thick walls at the bottom. Looked like it was contained to the roof, but it looked pretty good, and I'm sure it was very difficult to get water all the way up there.
right.
But we're pretty much the same. Maybe the less stories or more centered down like financial district, Back Bay, that type of area. When you
Mm,
start out getting into the neighborhoods where I'm at now, most of them senior housing. Um, there's a projects that have been renovated, uh, sprinkled with life safety sprinklers. Let me say that. Not uh, so we still got similar stuff. Those senior houses could be anywhere from three to double digit floors, and they're all pretty similar. And I noticed with the old ones, like I find a telltale sign is when I see an air conditioning in a window.
mm. I'm glad you said that, Eric, because take a look at this picture. And it wasn't
Yep.
until you just said that they're putting in spaces for air conditioners, right? And in your size up, if the chief arrives on the scene and it's a residential or if it's a commercial, the tell would be the air conditioners. But we're going to get to the next slide, and we're going to show that that's not always the tell. Even though they have air conditioners and there's no central HVAC, there
Yeah.
also could be other voids in there. So let me jump to the next slide, Eric, and I
Okay.
want to talk about a fire that we had. So this fire happened. It's one of these I call a federal building, right? And just to backtrack, in the 70s, when they burnt out the neighborhood, um, they put up these kind of hybrid buildings. They adhered to a federal code and didn't use the more stringent New York City code, which is probably one of
Codes.
the most stringent around. And this was just basically like you pointed out last time when we did our trial run that has air conditioners. And I'm like, if I was doing my size up, I'd say, okay, there's going to be no smoke spread problem unless the door is open and the windows are
Right.
open and et cetera,
Right.
et cetera. But then it was in April of about I want to say 2000, in the mid 2010, 15, 11, around, in the tens, in the teens. I was at FDIC. I remember exactly where I was. I was doing a forced entry class with John Buckeye, and it was rainy, just like a day like today, cold. And my daughter called me and she says, Dad, there's a fire in the Bronx in your old district, because I was a fireman in 17 truck. We were first due here.
Yeah.
And I talked to Steve Luisi, who's like, in my mind, one of the like the ultimate captains in the FDNY. He did like 40 something years. He worked in always busy places. He was captain in 44 truck, and really nothing rattled him. And he was rattled at this fire. He said he was up on the 25th to 26th floor. Now the fire was on the third floor. That's what it was numbered anyway. And people were literally hanging babies out the windows. He said the smoke was so thick you couldn't even see the hand in front of your face. And you know what the culprit was, Eric? Take a look at that blue door, and above it on the right-hand side, you see that little vent there? Yeah. It's some sort of air vent. And that just spread the smoke, because what happened was there was so much fire. The apartment was loaded with plastics. And Squad 41 was first due. And, man, you can't ask for much better companies to be on the line than Squad 41. They couldn't even get out the door. It was so much fire. It was so much fire and was so hot. And the doors, somehow, I guess the attack stair door was open. And between the vent and the attack stairs door being open, because they were trying to advance the line, the smoke just was permeating the building. I mean, every single floor was like lights out. You're doing your size up. I would think, initially, if I saw these air conditioners, I would say, okay, well, we got control of the apartment door. We're okay. But in this case, it wasn't the case. Have you ever had that experience? This is something that we talk about here in New York. And we always say that, like, if the first due truck company, who they're responsible for locating the fire, right? Mm-hmm. If they could get down the hallway and control that door, they've done their job. Have you had, in your experience, any similar experiences with these type 1 buildings where like, the door was open? You're laughing. You probably do, right?
Yeah. I remember one particular one. This when I was a captain, was right across the street. In fact, the call came in by someone banging on the door. Looked out like, oh, snap. Probably about the 5th floor of a building that was 69 feet tall, because when they tore down the brownstones, at that time, we were 70 feet and above is considered a sprinkler. They built it 69 feet exactly. So anyways, we were fortunate. We go up the stairs. Coming down the hallway, you could smell it, but it was clear as day. But as soon as that truck popped the door, it was lights off. Poof. Right. So from my perspective on the company, yep, we got the line in. We did a good job. But you were hearing all this yelling on the radio. Well, all that smoke was going up the attack stair, the elevator shafts. And what I'm curious about this is, so if they got ACs in the windows, the units themselves don't have central AC, but that air vent, I wonder if that's just for the hallways, and that's like a air handling system that will communicate fire and smoke. Well, smoke. Yeah. Now here's something I would say, like, so something like this, I would try to be familiar with it. You get a regular run, a medical, a bell, or something.
That's a good idea. Medical runs, yeah.
I would tell you, out of all, besides like fire department connections or whatever, I would certainly want to know that it had some type of air handling system in the hallway that can communicate smoke. And looking at it, I think I said it before, I used to live in an old commercial building, old chocolate factory. And each floor had those vents because of the heating system. Right. So I lived on the 4th and 5th floor. I never had to turn the heat on because my neighbors below would turn it on and it would come right up the shaft. Yeah. But that saved me money, but it also could have endangered us if there was a fire below. So I think that just something as simple as that vent should be something the first alarm should be aware of.
Yeah. I was born on the west side of Manhattan. I was born in Chelsea. It's like over between 8th and 9th Avenues. And my mom lived in a high rise. It was a 20-story high rise, and they call it Penn South. It's like we call them Mitchell Lama houses. They're not really projects, but they're not really luxury buildings.
Yeah, yeah.
And in my mom's bathroom, there was a vent in her bathroom and you could hear the wind, like you could hear the air whipping through there, right? I mean, windy days and whatnot, you know. And what she did actually, or I think I wound up doing, is I put a piece of cardboard over it, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But I always wondered, like, I've never had like a first-hand experience, like what would happen with smoke spread? Because think of it this way, right, Eric? If it is a true shaft, right, and you have a good draft and a good pull, it's not, unless it's stopped up, it's gonna vent. You know what I mean? It's not gonna really go into the apartments. It's gonna just bypass the floors, you know. But where we get in trouble is if there's an obstruction. Like we had fires always in compactors in these buildings, you know, and if the compactor chute was chock full of garbage, you started getting smoke on every floor, right? So doing your size up, I think we don't have to spend a ton of time on this. We did spend the whole last episode on it, but I would say the bottom line is when you're doing your size up, just be mindful that even though it's a fireproof or fire resistant building and you're not going to have fire outside that apartment, the smoke is going to be a killer. And that a testimony to that was the MGM Grand in Vegas, where we had like 85 fatalities in a fire that was like 20 floors below them. You know, people were dying in the stairways and in the apartments, you know, or the hotel rooms,
Correct.
you know, floors above, right? And
yeah,
so,
I think it's just something that should be aware. Whether it's something like what do they call it down there, SIDS or something information.
so we have the critical information. Yep.
Yeah, and here we might say they'll just read off a sheet. We have HB1. They'll say, et cetera, et cetera. It's something to be aware of because it's almost like the fire. I don't want to say the biggest problem will be the smoke, obviously. And you know, is people panic. They're not gonna stay in their pot. They don't care, no matter what you tell them. And if you say over a PA system like use stairwell 1, they don't care. They're going to the stairwell closest to them. They don't care. You almost can't blame them in a way. It's human nature. But I think especially those type of buildings, and you touched on something, how you said you called them federal, because like here sometimes with people are like, hey, and I use like say the MBTA, and I go state agency, they can tell us to screw, right. You know, and I wonder if all these buildings that were built like in the 70s and 80s, that's why they used federal to like circumvent all these fire prevention codes.
Exactly. You know, and just another thing to consider, Eric, before we move on. Now that came in as a fire on the 3rd floor, right? But look at the where it's at. It's probably up about 60 feet, let's say. In these types of buildings, it's also critical to know, like sometimes they'll do this, like there'll be a school on the first 2 or 3 floors, and then you have the first residential wouldn't be like what's really tantamount to like the 5th or 6th floor. Or you might have a big mezzanine, or you might have shopping centers, like, you know, a lot of high rises, more the luxury places in Manhattan. You might have department stores taking up the first 2 floors, or restaurants or whatever. So it's need to know like what you're dealing with, you know, like as far as like where the fire is, as opposed to, you know, what floor it's on. Like I would know how high up.
Yeah.
So Eric, I'm going to move on to this next slide, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I'm going to spend very little time on it. And it's the type 2 building, and I'm just going to read this verbatim from Dunn. It just says, the fire problem associated with non-combustible, limited combustible building is the flat steel roof deck covering that could ignite during a fire. So I've seen these. They're the big box stores. They're the Home Depots. They're the Costco, BJ's, you name it. And they have the steel bar joist roof, you know, the Q decking, and then they have the asphalt. And what happens with these, the walls itself are non-combustible. right? Because they're concrete, right?
Yep.
But the roof is highly combustible. It's like asphalt. It's like gasoline. So
Yep.
it looks very impressive. But what happens is we've had a few. We had one built, and some of these sometimes they could be like 250 by 250. I mean, they go on forever. We had one down in the Bronx. It was called Jetro, and I think it was like 1,000 by 1,000. You know, and once the roof gets going, you know, so you know, just as part of your size up, you just got to realize that what happen with these, and I think Dunn talks about it, is that what will happen, right? Even though the fire looks really impressive from the street, it looks like the whole place is on fire. It's really just that roof space, but that asphalt will drip down and catch things that are below it.
Combustible. Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to just keep that in mind. It would be the contents are going to be the problem, you know, because these things, they're loaded with stock and you name it. So the building itself really isn't combustible, but it's the roof is the roofing itself, I should say, because and then the other thing we have to consider, if the fire is in the contents, it should be sprinkled. But you know what? Sometimes those rack storages hide, you know, they cover up the sprinkles, right? If it gets hot enough, we know that those trusses, if they're lightweight, you know, they're not going to withstand a lot of heat. You know, there's a good potential for collapse, you know?
Yeah. Plus, if you add any type of equipment on the roof, that's just gonna
Exactly. Now we would hope though, with the air conditioning, that they would run it on an I-beam and it would be carried down the outside walls, right? We would hope, right? But we can't always. I'm just
we see
yeah.
we see a lot of fires on social media, like in the interior, and you hear people yelling, "Why ain't the sprinklers going off? Why ain't the sprinklers going off?" So I'm always like, unless you tested them recently, I don't trust them personally.
Yeah. Right. So I'm just trying to see what Dunn says
Icing
about
on the
collapse. Because he talks about collapse, and what he talks about with non-combustible, he says non-combustible construction is becoming the nation's most widely used construction type. Now, he wrote this book, God knows when, in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Replacing brick and wood joists is the most economical method of building such structures as one-story large commercial occupancies. There are three types of basic non-combustible buildings. The metal frame construction covered by metal exterior walls, the metal frame structure enclosed by concrete block and non-bearing exterior walls, and the concrete block bearing walls supporting metal roof structure. Of the three types, the steel roof structure system may be either one of the following: a system of solid steel girders and beams, or lightweight open bar web, or a combination of both. So that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the collapse danger to a firefighter from a non-combustible is the roof cave-in. That's what we're worried about. It's all about the roof. It's all about the joist. So, like I said, I don't really want to spend a lot of time on this, because even though it seems to me like when we talk about risk, it's a very high hazard in a sense, but it's a very low risk. I mean, in my whole career, I could count maybe on one hand how many fires I've had in something like this.
Yeah,
and maybe one or two that required anything.
It's good to be aware of it, but I would caution new chiefs from getting bogged down on just this. Like, study them all,
right?
You know.
All right, so Erik, let's talk about type 3s, and this is in everybody's city, right? These are the, you know, they call them in South America, they call them mixed, you know, wood and concrete, wood and brick. We call them class 3s in New York. I'm sure you use the NFPA in Boston, you call them the type 3s. And, you know, and what Dunn talks about, and I don't have to read Dunn to know what this is all about. I mean, I know all this stuff anyway, but just look at the voids, right? These are the major voids, right? You have the ceilings, you know, with lath and plaster. And once that fire gets into that void, you know, depending if there's any fire stops, it's off to the races, right? This one on the bottom here, that's a dumbwaiter shaft. And most of them aren't in use anymore. I would say that most buildings that have them have converted them into either closets, or they use them just to run wiring or pipes or whatever, wire cable, whatever.
Cable, fiber optics.
And here's the other killer right here is the steam pipes, right? And so when you get a call, when you get your phone alarm comes in for a fire in a type 3, the first thing you should be thinking about is what's going on with the voids and where's the fire, right? So
Yeah.
I want to show you the most deadly void, and we got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to finish up on this. This was basically our bread and butter. Brannigan talks about what he says about voids. Fire will break out of void spaces with lightning speed, killing more firefighters than collapse. I could tell you firsthand, when I was a fireman in Squad 41, I went to an apartment. I started pulling ceilings, and I looked up, and there was nothing but fire over my head. And I'll tell you why. It was a rehab building. So what we did in the Bronx, and mostly in the 12th, the 16th, some of the 13th Battalion, the 14th, the 26th, the 3rd, the 17th, and the 18th and the 19th, all those Bronx battalions had nothing but rehabilitated H-types, tenements, old law tenements. And what they do is you could see the old, if you could see it up here, Eric, you see where I have the arrow here, right? That's the new drop ceiling, but above it, you could still see the original joist. And actually what you would find a lot of times in these buildings, you'd still see the charring from the original fires from the 70s and, during the war years. So what they did is they basically just sheetrocked everything. They just put these 2x4s up. They sheetrocked the walls. They sheetrocked the ceilings. But once the fire gets into those voids, let me show you something. It is off to the races, man. I mean, this is what it looks like, and nothing to consider. And I'll right now, but is the BX cable, and I have my own theories about BX. But look at this void. Look at the BX. This is what happens. This is what I think is happening. You have a mini cockloft on every floor, right? So exactly what's happening is you see the BX sitting on top of that 2x4.
Yep.
What do you think happens after about 2 or 3 years with all the heavy computers and big screen TVs and microwaves and all that stuff? What's happening with that BX?
Yeah, pyrolysis.
Pyrolysis, exactly.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that cable wrapping at all myself. I also see a lot of water damage, which piqued my little interest.
Yep.
Yeah, it seems like let's just cover up problems, move on, rent them, sell them, whatever they do. And that looks like a soil pipe in the back as well. So they're all interconnected.
Right. So what's happening though, think about the time of year. If it's like this is why New York does this so well, right? We have that SIDS and it'll say, phone alarm, but the SIDS will say rehab, class 3 rehab. We know that it's a renovated building. My first thought is we're going to have problems with voids. And, even the odor of smoke, you're getting an odor of smoke, you got to investigate that, because what happens invariably is either these BX cables heat up and they start paralyzing and start smoking a little bit. And you said the soil pipe, if they're kicking on the heat for the first time, September, October, November, whatever it is, that wood might be so brittle, right, that it may just kick. That first time they turn the heat on, boom. So what I did, I remember at this one fire, it was in Harlem. It got into the voids, and this is the only time I think I ever was at a fire on the first floor, and 2 hours later, I'm cutting the roof. I mean, it was just that kind of fire, Yeah,
I could think of a fire years ago when I was on a tower company at the time. Was way out in Brighton, out by BC. It went from, fires knocked down to somebody actually put a rake through the ceiling, yada, yada. We were there for about 5 hours. and it really was, the fire got in the voids and it just took off.
That's it.
It was a chase.
And don't think this is a big city problem, because you can have this problem anywhere in America. Any building that's been renovated, any type of construction. So we're talking about type 3s. So in this instance, what I would say, if you're doing your size up, and let's say you arrive on scene and it comes in as, this always happens, Eric, it comes in as an odorous smoke, right? Now you're in the street and your guys, it's 2 a.m. and they're like, all right, it's dissipating, whatever. We're not smelling it anymore. You don't leave until you find that source of that smoke, because I'm telling you what's happening right now. It's this cable right here. It could be shorted. It could be there could be a breach in the cable. It could be anything. It could heat it up, or that soil pipe. It could be just a little tiny smoldering fire. But once it gets an influx of air, boom, it's party over.
Chases on.
It's like lights out, you know? So I would just say, as part of your size up, just consider that if it's an odorous smoke, you might be there for about a half hour looking for this thing. And at the same time, if you got a fire in an apartment, these apartments are generally run in a line. I would be very, very diligent in two places. I would be diligent in the floor above and the top floor, because if the fire gets into the let's say the dumbwaiter shaft or whatever, you're going right up to the cock loft, So be careful with the dumbwaiters. Be careful with these voids. Like you said, I said you have a mini cock loft on every floor.
Yeah.
Let me see if I'm not sure what the next slide. So this is just. I don't want to talk about this too much. It's Black Sunday. We all know about it, but there was other problems. I'll show you what the problem was with Black Sunday. I actually had a fire in this building when I was lieutenant with 42 engine, and I'll never forget it. We were by ourselves, and it was on the first floor, and it was just like, I just remember it because the door was propped open, and it was just the fire. It just met us right at the door, But here's the problem. You talk about voids, and we'll kind of finish up on this. They put up this false wall when they renovated it, and the false wall didn't have access to the fire escape. It cut this off, So when they came in, if you follow the cursor, they passed right past this, and the fire was rolling merrily on the floor below. And that's what happened. It was just, it got into this, it's like a major void, Let me just get a slide. So anyway, without getting into the next postring. So unfortunately, it was the voids, and it's very easy to miss. I mean, look how small that door was. It was like a little tiny door, and you just passed right by it. Meanwhile, the fire is burning underneath, This kind of happened in the 23rd Street fire in the 60s, where we lost 12 firefighters because the basement was let's say, took from 23rd Street to 22nd Street. The drugstore on the floor above, the wall, the partition wall was over the fire, but meanwhile, when they went into the basement on 23rd Street, there was nothing showing. But there was like an overlap, right? There was 10 feet that the drugstore was over the fire, but meanwhile, the firefighters in the basement gave a message above saying, hey, listen, it's all clean down here. So this is the problems with voids with type 3s, is that we have to be very, very diligent in looking for voids. So anyway, we got about 2 minutes left. Erik, anything you want to just close up with?
No, we pretty much covered we covered the last episode. But I really think that pay attention. I'm not sure how New York does it, but here, if you're legally renovating stuff, I'm gonna get the permit,
right?
And what the scope of the work is. And I don't always go out like I used to, but there's certain ones that catch my eye, and I will go out several times during the rehab. Because one last thing, it's real quick, if I could tell you, I was second alarm chief at this fire, wood frame, and in the back, the fire's knocked down, but it's still hot, and I'm saying something's not right. So I kind of like stood back and realized they had walled off the back bedroom.
Yeah.
That you could only enter from the back stairs, and they were renting as a single room. We call it Philly style. I don't know where it comes from, where that nickname comes from, but I always look for stuff like that during rehabs. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So I guess let's wrap up with this. I guess the takeaway from this episode is that, talking about type 3s, mixed construction, class 3s, or what you want to call them, that if the building was renovated, we have to be extremely thorough. We have to check open up everything. Look, match the floor, fire floor to the floor above and the floor below. Make sure there's no fire walled off in like you just said, a room that's been walled off or whatever. But I would just say that's the takeaway from this is just keep in mind that, there could be areas that we didn't check, right? So anyway, Erik, so next week we'll continue with type 3s. We'll talk about some more of the size up and some of the other stories that relate to type 3s. And until then, be safe, and we'll see you again on the YouTube.
Peace.
Peace out. Okay. All right. Hey, Alex.